We're going to get into actually completing the square today, where yesterday we were talking just about that square root property, but the reason why we talked about the square root property is because you're going to use a little bit of that when you're solving something using this completing the square method. What completing the square does is it takes a quadratic form that can't be factored like really nicely or put into something that's a quantity squared and we can use our square root property, and it rewrites it so that we can use that because it makes it easier for us to solve it then. There's three main steps that we have to follow when it comes to completing the square. So right here in this chart, you're going to start with something in this form, x squared plus bx. So remember we talked about like standard form of quadratics is always the x squared, the x, and then a number. So what's happening is we just don't have a number attached at the end. So we don't have like plus 5 or minus 2 at the end of our quadratic. What we're going to do though is just look at those first two terms, the x squared and the x term. And step one is to take your b term, which would be the number that sits in front of the x. So that's that coefficient, and you're going to take half of it. So you're going to divide it by 2. So if the number is 8, you're going to divide 8 by 2. If it's 9, you're going to divide 9 by 2. Then for the second step is you square that. So if it was 8 divided by 2, that's 4. So then I'm going to square 4. And then to finish it out, we add whatever we got in step 2 to the end of our equation, because then that makes it become something that's able to be factored so that we have a perfect square trinomial here. So what we're going to do first is not work on solving this one. I just want us to write out what would we do to complete the square here. So they want us to write this like at the very end as a binomial squared. So right now we have x squared plus 14x. So first of all, 14, that's your b term, because that's sitting in front of the x. So step one is to take that b term and cut it in half. So we're going to take 1/2 times the b. That would be 1/2 times 14, which is 7. Step 2 is to take that 7 and square it. And so that gives me 49. Step 3 is to take the problem that they gave us, so that's the x squared plus 14x, and attach what we got in step 2 to it. So we attach that 49 to the end, so it says plus 49. The reason why we would do that is so that instead of writing it as x squared plus 14x plus 49, we can write this as a quantity, so like x plus or minus a number squared. So like I was just showing you guys on that homework assignment, those specific ones that you're looking for the same number to do two things, so that when I write it out, it said like x minus 8, x minus 8, and I wrote it as x minus 8 squared. So if you guys look at this problem, what two numbers are going to multiply to 49 and add to 14? It should be the same number twice. What do you guys think? What numbers are going to multiply to 49 and add to 14? 7. So I'm going to write this as x plus 7 squared. So completing the square is to get the equation side, the quadratic side, to look like that, so that we are able to then use our square root property from yesterday to actually solve this quadratic equation for x. So we're going to get into actually solving now. So when it has a solving portion to it, so if they're not just asking you to write it out or to just complete the square, if they say solve by completing the square, then you're going to do all of these steps that I just showed you, but then you're going to use your square root property like you did yesterday to actually finish it out. So that's what we're going to do now. The thing that might look different for these ones is that instead of just giving you the x squared and the x term, there will be an equal sign and there may be a number on the other side of it. So I'll show you how we handle, like how this one says equals 3. I'm going to show you how do you handle that. But you're going to start just like we did before. Your b term for this one is that 4. So for step 1, we're going to do 1/2 of b. So 1/2 of 4. Or 4 divided by 2, which is 2. Step 2 is to take that number and square it. So 2 squared, which would be 4. And now here's where it changes just a little bit because we're solving it now. So normally what I do is I look at the equation up above. So x squared plus 4x equals 3. I bring everything down. So I do x squared plus 4x. Instead of just doing straight to an equal sign, I do plus and I draw in a blank. Then I bring down my equal sign and my 3, and then I do another plus and another blank. Why am I doing this? Well, whatever I do to one side of the equation, I have to do to the other side to keep it balanced. You guys learned that back in Algebra 1 when you were solving equations. If you subtracted from the left side, you have to subtract from the right side. If you multiply to the left side, you have to multiply to the right side. So you have to keep this equation balanced. So because I'm trying to actually solve it now, and I've got this 3 on the other side there that's kind of throwing this off, whatever I do to the left side, I have to make sure I do to the right side. Now, what number comes in here? Well, that's from up above. So from step 2, this 4, that gets dropped into the blank. Okay, so you just drop a 4 down there. So now we write the left side as a quantity squared. So you're again thinking, I need the same number twice to multiply to 4 and add to 4, which is going to be a 2. The other thing that you guys can do, kind of like a cheat, look at step 1. When you did half of your b, you got a 2. That number that you get in step 1 is always what's going to drop into your parentheses, because it's going to be that magic number that multiplies and adds to those two terms. So we're going to write this as x plus 2 squared. And now we have 3 plus 4, which would be 7. To finish this out then, using our square root property, we square root both sides. So we put a square root over the left side and a square root over the right side. On the left side, remember that the square root and the squared basically just cancel each other out. And so we have x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 7, which 7 is not going to be able to get reduced at all because it's a prime number. So 4 is not going to go into 7. 9 is going to be way too big. So the last thing we need to do is subtract 2. And this is going to write our final answer here. So it's going to say x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 7. Let's look at another one together. If you guys turn your page over. So for this one, to get it started, we have to rewrite it a little bit first, because you want your x squared and your x term to be on the same side of the equal sign, and then your number, you can have it be on the other side. So right now I have 12x equals x squared minus 8. I want to basically switch. What I'm going to do is keep my x squared term positive. So I'm going to take my 12x and my negative 8, and I want them to switch places. I basically just want to flip them around. But I'm also going to write it backwards because I like my x squared to come first. So if I switch 12x over to the right side, right now it's positive 12x. To move it, I would be subtracting it. So it's going to become negative. So I'm going to write this as x squared minus 12x. And then if I move the negative 8 over, that becomes positive 8 now because I would have added it. So I've switched those two terms around, and then I also switched the way that I wrote it because I like x squared to come first. It's easier if we see x squared, then our x term equals our number because it looks like what we saw earlier. So step 1 is to do your half of your b term. This time b is negative 12. we're going to do 1/2 of negative 12, which would be negative 6. Step 2 is to square that number. Make sure you watch your sign here, because a negative times a negative is still going to make this become positive. So when you guys do step 2, when you square it, you should always get a positive number. Because no matter if you're doing positive times positive or negative times negative, it always comes out to be a positive answer. So negative 6 squared would be 36. Then for step 3, I rewrite it, and this is when I start putting in those blanks. So I do x squared minus 12x plus a blank equals 8 plus another blank. Then remember, your 36, that number from step 2, that's what you put into those blanks. That's why we did that work up above. So we're factoring the left side now. So I need two numbers that multiply to 36, add to negative 12. I told you guys that kind of the shortcut to find that number is to go back up to step 1 and see what 1/2 of b was, which is that negative 6. So if you test it, negative 6 times negative 6 is going to get you positive 36. Negative 6 plus negative 6 gets you that negative 12. So that's why it always works that way. So we're going to write this as x minus 6 squared. And then 8 plus 36 is 44. Now we're back to what you guys did yesterday in class. Square root both sides. On the left side, x minus 6 comes out by itself. Plus or minus, what's the perfect square number that can go into 44? 4. 4 times what is 44? Good, so I'm going to rewrite that as 4 times 11. So now I'm going to have x minus 6 equals, plus or minus, the square root of 4 becomes a 2, so that comes out of the square root sign. 11 has to stay underneath the square root sign. What's the last thing I need to do here to get x alone? Add 6. Okay, and just like we did earlier and on the previous problem, I'm just going to write it as a sentence. I'm going to always put the number first, so 6, then my plus or minus to square root of 11. There's a really high chance that you're going to get numbers that look like that. Okay? Especially when you're dealing with quadratics and you're using completing the square, it's actually more rare for you to get nice whole numbers to come out. It's really common to get weird sentences like this that have square root signs still attached to it. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one. So the first thing again is I want to rewrite this. I want my x squared and my x term to be together, and I want that number to be on the other side of the equal sign. So I want to switch the negative 5 and the 2x around. This one should be a little bit easier to rewrite than the last one, because you're just taking those two terms and you're just flip-flopping them. So, and they're also just going to change signs. You don't have to do anything about like rewriting it so that x squared is first, because x squared is already first. So it's going to say x squared. If I move 2x over, it's going to now say minus 2x equals, if I move negative 5 over to the other side, it changes to positive 5. Okay, why don't you guys start doing your 3 steps. Do the half of b. I want to see you guys do that. I want to see you square your result there. And then I want to see you guys rewrite the equation. So can you guys tell me what number is in the B spot? Like which number did you use for B? -2. It's always the number in front of the x term is your B. So we're doing 1/2 of -2. What is 1/2 of -2? 1 or -1. Okay. So step 2 is to take -1 and square it. So what's -1 times -1? 1. So this 1 is what you guys should have dropped into those blanks. So it should say x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 5 plus 1. Okay? Now, how do I write this as a quantity squared? X, and then what comes next? Where did I say the shortcut is? What number are you pulling from up above to just drop into your parentheses? Be that -1. So up here, step 1, this number, -1 just drops into those parentheses because that's going to be the number that multiplies to a 1 and adds to a -2. And then we have 5 plus 1, which would be 6. What would you guys do next here? Square root, both sides. So then we have x minus 1 on the left side equals plus or minus the square root of 6. Are you going to be able to do anything with that 6 underneath the radical? Good. Some of you are shaking your heads no. No, you can't. 4 doesn't go into 6. 9 would be too big. So we're going to have to just leave 6 alone. What's the last thing I need to do then? Add 1. So final answer should say x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 6. All right, there is one more here in your guys' packet for this section. I'm going to rewrite it for you guys first, and then I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to do the whole thing. Just like that last one, you need to switch the 13 and the 8x around. They need to switch places. So it's going to say x squared. 8x is going to get moved to the left side, so you're going to subtract it. So it becomes minus 8x. And then plus 13 is going to get subtracted to the right side. So it's going to say negative 13. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. I want you to do the whole thing. Okay, so here's the first three steps. Half of b would be -4. You square that, you get a 16. You drop those into the blanks that you should have written out. After this, we rewrite the left side as a perfect square binomial. So it's x minus 4. That minus 4 again, shortcut is to just take it from step 1. -13 plus 16 is going to give you a 3. Then we square root both sides. So we have x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 3, which we're not going to be able to do anything with that because 3 isn't a perfect square and 4 is the first one that we have and it's too big. So then we add 4 over. So we write out our final answer to say x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 3.